So now that we've discussed macroeconomics versus microeconomics, let's dive into the basic definitions that we're going to come across throughout the entire semester. So our first important definition is obviously to define what are we even going to be talking about this semester in terms of what is economics. So a lot of times people assume that we're going to learn about the stock market and how to decide if we're going to see stocks increase or decrease. And a lot of what has to do with the economy does influence the stock market, but we're not going to talk about the stock market specifically. So, economics, the textbook definition that we're going to use, is the study of how economic agents make decisions under scarcity. So when we're talking about economic agents, we're going to break down each of that whole definition, because that's kind of an intense definition. So when we're referring to economic agents, we could be talking about individual households. So we could be talking about your decisions, my decisions, the president's decisions. We could be talking about just any individual economic agent, any individual household. We could be talking about business. So we could be talking about the coffee shop down the street, or we could be talking about Apple and the decisions that they make. And we can also be talking about governments or society as a whole. So we can think about a bigger picture and how does, the government decide what to spend on national defense. We can be talking about the decision of society and what are society's preferences towards green energy. And so we can be thinking about all of those different economic agents when we're looking at economics. Talking about scarcity means that we have a limited number of resources. Wouldn't it be great if everybody in the world had an unlimited amount of money and we could all have exactly what we needed? That would be great, but it's not feasible because all resources in society are limited. There's a limited number of goods and services that economies can produce, and so an unlimited amount of money would do no good in helping everyone get what they need because there's constraints on production. So there's a limited amount of food that the ground can grow, and there's a limited amount of factories, a limited number of workers that can work within each of those factories. So there's limitations on production. And so when we talk about scarcity, we have to make decisions as economic agents on what we're going to do with our time, because time is scarce. So as an individual household, we need to make decisions on should we work or should we go to school? Should we work or should we hang out with our friends? Should we work or sit on the couch and watch Netflix? So we have to make decisions. We have to weigh those decisions and decide what's the best use of my scarce time. Again, we also have to do that with money. So what's the best use of my scarce money? I don't have unlimited amount of money. And so what can I do? What's the best option to do with my money? If I decide to, go out to eat with my friends, that's less money I have to spend going to a concert or something like that. So we have scarce number of resources as individuals. Businesses have the same issue. They have a scarce number of workers. They have a scarce amount of factory space, or any other input. So maybe it's a restaurant, they have a scarce amount of oven space, any of those different components depending on the business. And so what's the best use of that business's time? Should they use their workers and factory to, if you're Apple, should we use it to produce iPhones or iPads? So if we produce more iPhones, that leaves us less workers, less factory space to produce iPads. And governments also have this issue as well. If we spend more on national defense, that leaves less money to spend on healthcare. And so we have to make decisions on how to spend our scarce resources. All right, so scarcity, again, referring to the fact that there's a limited amount of time, of goods and services, of workers, of whatever input goes into that decision on what to produce, what to buy. There's a scarce resource. We'll talk more about resources in our upcoming video, so if you're not really familiar with that term, we'll be coming to that. Our next definition plays off of that idea of scarcity, and it's opportunity cost. So a lot of times when you hear the word cost, you're thinking about your money, your monetary value, but opportunity cost in economics, we're going to talk about that cost of a good or service, excuse me, In terms of our next best option, so not a monetary value necessarily, but what would we be doing if we weren't, when we made that decision, what would we be doing if we did not make that decision? So you made the decision to attend the University of South Carolina. If you did not attend the University of South Carolina, what would you be doing instead? We have an unlimited number of options, right? We could be working at various different jobs. We could be attending a different college. We could be sitting on the couch, watching Netflix. So we could have many, many different options. But the opportunity cost is the specific one that you would be doing if you weren't attending the University of South Carolina. So what is that one thing you would be doing? And when we're thinking about that, so if your next best option, if I wasn't at the University of South Carolina, I would be going to, I don't know, Clemson. So, that's your opportunity cost, but that might be different from somebody else. Somebody else might be saying, well, I had this really great full-time job before I came to the university. So I would be working at that full-time job. So we could all have different opportunity costs, even though we ended up in the same, University of South Carolina. We all have different opportunity costs, and it's only one. So we only had one next best option. What would I be doing if I was not doing this one thing? Well, I would be doing this one other thing. All right, businesses have opportunity costs as well. When I just said, every time that Apple decides to produce more iPhones, their next best option was to produce iPads. And so they gave up producing iPads every time they decide to produce more iPhones. And that's the opportunity cost. What was their next best option? They could be also producing Macs and everything else that they have in their lineup, Apple Watches. But what was their one next thing that they really wanted to produce? It was iPads. And so that is the opportunity cost of producing more iPhones. All right. So when we're thinking about opportunity cost, I want you not to necessarily think in monetary terms. Don't think about what's the cost of going to the University of South Carolina, but what did you give up to go to the University of South Carolina? And remember, it's only one thing, because it could be that you gave up a full-time job. I also gave up my scholarship to, 3 other universities, but it's not all of those things. It's just the one thing that you would be doing instead. What's your next best option? All right. So then we can then move on to our decision on our marginal analysis. So how do I decide, what to do with my time? How much do I contribute to, how many years do I decide to go to the University of South Carolina? Or how much time should Apple spend producing their iPhones? And we use what we call marginal analysis, and we weigh the marginal benefit, which is the added benefit from doing that one thing. So the additional year of going to South Carolina, the additional iPhone. We could be talking about, even studying for your economics test. What's the benefit of, studying one more hour for your economics test? And so we weigh the marginal benefit to the marginal cost. So what's the additional cost of that, that additional year of schooling, that additional iPhone? What's the additional cost of studying for economics? So as we study, let's stick with our example of studying for economics, but it can apply to any of these. So the first hour that I study for economics, I might just gain just a ton of information. And the second hour, I gain a lot of information. And the third, I'm still gaining a lot of information. But as I start studying, for the 10th and 11th hour, my additional information that I'm gathering is going to start to fall. So I might still, be learning and learning and learning, but it's not going to be just a straight line up. It's going to, eventually it's going to level off, and I'm not going to learn as much with each additional hour. And so the marginal benefit, while it's increasing, while I'm still learning, I'm not learning as much with each additional hour. And on the other hand, the marginal cost, I might be really pumped to study for that first and that second hour of economics. But when I say, okay, I'm going to study for my 10th hour of economics, I might be starting to get very bogged down with the information. And so whenever the marginal benefit of studying for economics, the marginal benefit of producing an additional iPhone, whatever it is, whenever the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost, then we're going to produce that unit. or we're going to consume that unit. We're going to say, yes, I'm all in when the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost. But at some point, the marginal cost will begin to exceed the marginal benefit. It will cost us more to consume that, to produce that good, than it will the additional benefit we get from producing or consuming that good. And so we weigh the marginal benefit to the marginal cost and we decide that is how much to consume, that is how much to produce. So that's our marginal analysis. And a lot of times we're going to look at that, look at each individual unit, how much benefit do we get from that next unit, how much does it cost us for that additional unit, and we're going to weigh that decision. That's going to come later on in the semester, but I wanted to introduce it now as a very important topic when we're thinking about making decisions, which is the primary goal of economics, is to understand the decision making process.